Hi again, everyone. It's time again for Andrew and Bryan, and that 70s podcast coming to you from New Richmond, Wisconsin. And my sidekick Andrew is in Orlando, Florida. How you doing, Andrew?
Not too bad. I thought you were the sidekick, so that's weird. No, I'm joking. Obviously, this is that 70s pod with Bryan Lee. Yes, I'm in Orlando, Florida. Um, in my one of my old studios, aka my car. Uh, just for some sound effects and everything. We're gonna try something a little bit different. So bear with us if the audio. Hopefully I can fix it and post. But yeah, last week we did a two-part actually and got really good reviews, at least on the first part. We talked about all music of the 70s. Was there something that you wish you would have touched on, or a certain album or band from our two-part episode last week?
Well, it's funny you brought that up because I was just thinking the other day. I heard a song on the radio where I work, and I thought, we didn't really touch on those one-hit wonders from the 70s. There was a song called Radar Love by a group called Golden Earring. And 1970s purists would know who I'm talking about. Um, Great song. It was kind of their only big hit. And there was a lot of that in the 70s. The 80s probably had more of them, but the 70s also had those one hit wonders like Radar Love, which has got great guitar music and drums and bass guitar. And it starts out with sort of a driving uh, bass beat that goes boom, 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 boom. And it's just a great song. And there were so many of those in the 70s. I thought of another one the other day, but now it escapes me. Um, I don't remember if we talked about the Doobie Brothers. I love the Doobie Brothers in the 70s with China Grove and taking it to the streets. And maybe we did touch on them, but uh, great music from them. We did talk about Cheap Trick a little bit. We talked about Van Halen a little bit. They were more in the latter part of the 70s, but those early 70s music, like Manfred Mann and Blinded by the Light. Great song. I hear that song just about every day when I'm at work, Andrew. And, I always kind of sing along to it in my head, Blinded by the Light. And yeah, just some great stuff. Steely Dan, reeling in the years. Great music. So yeah, had a lot of fun with that two-part episode, and I'm so glad we did it. And I hope we get some input from our listeners as to maybe what they hoped we would have talked about, maybe just forgot about. But there were so many great bands in the '70s, and yeah, I'm thinking of more of them. They're just popping into my head here. Like the Edgar Winter Band did an instrumental that was actually on the charts called Frankenstein, and uh, uh, and I'm sure there were others, and I'm just not thinking of what they all are right now. Of course, Motown was big, and Billy Preston had some great stuff, and yeah, just a wonderful decade for music.
Yes, I've been. We did talk about the Doobie Brothers quite a bit actually, and I've been listening to a lot of Motown now since we filmed that. A lot of Foundations, Four Tops. You just said another one that reminded me, and then I heard that "You're So Vain" song. Was that from the 70s?
Yeah, Carly Simon was a female singer uh, who had some great stuff. Anticipation, Vengeance, You're So Vain, um, a song called Jesse, which Jesse the Body Ventura insists that Carly Simon wrote for him. It's not true, but but Jesse Ventura had claimed that a lot, that he hung out with a lot of the 70s rock people, that he would hang out with the Stones whenever they were in town in Minneapolis. And, basically, Jesse was a security guard at the St. Paul Civic Center when the Stones were there. And he maybe got a picture with Mick Jagger. But yeah, it's not like he was out partying. But that's a different story for a different time.
Would you ever want to do? Is there enough to Would you ever want to do a Jesse Ventura only 70s episode?
Um, well, he came to the AWA in 1979, maybe it was 78.
Gotcha.
So yeah, he didn't really burst onto the wrestling scene until the late 70's. And I remember when he first came on, his very first match in the AWA, I thought Superstar Billy Graham was back because Jesse came in the ring with the psychedelic pants, uh, sunglasses, a leather boa, or not leather, a feathered boa, and it had the long blonde hair that was kind of slicked back, and Jesse was a huge fan of Superstar Billy Graham, and that's what he was trying to emulate. So when he first came into the ring, uh, and I don't remember who he wrestled, Kenny J or something. And I thought, oh, Superstar Graham is back, but he doesn't look quite the same. It's because it was Jesse Ventura.
Yeah. That Carly Simon song
So,
you're so vain.
yeah,
Did they ever did was that ever announced or revealed who she was referring to?
no, I don't even think she wrote the song. I mean, that's something I would have to look up. But um, there was another song in the I don't think it was in the 70's. It might have been 1980 or 81. Rick Springfield did a song called Jesse's Girl. Do you remember that song?
Yeah, I know how to
You know,
play
I
that.
wish I had, yeah, I wish I had Jesse's Girl. I was at a wrestling show once, and Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell were wrestling Jerry Blackwell and Adrian Adonis. And at some point during the match, Adrian Adonis and Jesse Ventura were real tag team partners, but Jesse wasn't at this show. It was in the New Richmond High School gym, and the fans started chanting Jesse's Girl to Adrian Adonis. And it took him a little bit to figure out what they were chanting. And then he turned around and looked at the crowd and said, "Who are you talking about?" It was pretty funny. Um, so yeah, Adrian Adonis, at least for that show, was Jesse's Girl.
So do you have a
But today, what's that?
do you have a Jesse Ventura impression that you can talk about what today's episode is going to be?
Well, Andrew, the body living on Lake Minnetonka here in Minneapolis. I was thinking that I watched a lot of TV when I wasn't a Navy SEAL, so I think we'll talk about TV shows of the 70's today.
Okay, we're gonna have to make that a tradition for every episode now. Um, Jesse's gonna introduce us. Yeah, we talked about just a variety of music before, um, which we are gonna do an ABBA episode
Actually,
coming up. What's up?
actually, talking about TV shows and the best Jesse Ventura impression I've ever heard is from a guy from Mad TV called Will Lasso. He does a great Jesse Ventura.
He does, yes. And he just did a sit down interview. There's this podcast, another YouTube show, Chris Van Fleet. He did an interview with Jesse Ventura. I don't know if you watched that. Jesse Ventura's like first sit down interview in a while, and he had Will Sasso and another impressionist, which actually a current WWE wrestler of Karrion Kross, like sitting there doing an impression of Jesse right in front of him. Good stuff. But yeah, Will Sasso's
Yeah.
a tough guest. Really funny. And I know we talked about TV in the past. We did when we did that dive, that huge dive into the 70's a few weeks ago, that 2 hour episode. We talked about a few TV shows. And then we did your after school TV lineup. I know there's cartoons. So if today, for the next half an hour or so, do you want to talk? Are we talking about TV shows that you specifically watched or that you think are iconic from the 70's, kind of like what we did with music last week?
Well, a little bit of both because I've Googled a few things concerning TV shows in the 70's, and I came across one list that said TV shows that shaped history or made a large impact on history. And some of them were shows I never watched. All in the Family with the Archie Bunker and Edith and um, played by the wonderful actor Carol O'Connor. That show was too much for me. It was just too much. It kind of broke new territory, and I guess it was a landmark in a way, but it was very degrading to certain. I mean, a show like that would never be on TV nowadays because it was very degrading to certain demographics, to especially Black Americans and Hispanics and stuff. I mean, the show really pushed the limits, and I suppose that's why they feel like All in the Family was maybe a TV show that shaped history, maybe not necessarily in a good way, but I guess it opened doors to other things. I mean, the Jeffersons were basically a spinoff of All in the Family because the Jeffersons were neighbors to Archie Bunker, and then they wound up making a TV show about the Jeffersons, who were a well-to-do Black American family. So those two shows, Andrew, I never really watched, but they're right up there on the list of all-time TV shows in the 70s that shaped America. Another one would be MASH, which I watched. MASH, even though the Korean War itself only lasted a couple of years, MASH lasted 13 years. And MASH is a wonderful TV show. Uh,
Still watch it?
thought I
You
lost
still?
you. Thought I lost you there for a minute.
Yeah, we did. It's all right. Sorry about the technical difficulties. I mean, you still watch MASH, don't you?
Did you ask me if I still watch MASH?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I do. Certainly, it's in syndication. It will be forever. Um, MASH used to be on Monday nights when in the 70s. So you would basically watch MASH, and then whatever was on after that, and then Monday Night Football would be on at 8 o'clock. So MASH was always a good prelude, even though it was on a different network. MASH was on CBS, Monday Night Football was on ABC. So it you would watch MASH, and then you would flip over to Monday Night Football. So it was a good way to kick off a Monday night. On Tuesday nights, um, Happy Days was introduced by ABC in 1973, I think, 73 or 74. And soon after that, you had Laverne and Shirley, uh, Three's Company. Mork and Mindy came later. That was on a different night. But that lineup, Andrew, was huge for ABC. Never missed it. Every week you had Happy Days, which was just a great program. Ronnie Howard, for the second time around, was on a hit TV show. Yeah, he was such a wonderful child actor on the Andy Griffith Show in the early '60s, and here he is now as in his early 20s, and he's on a hit show again. It's also the show we got introduced to the Fonz, Henry Winkler, who just his popularity became immense because of his character Fonzie. Um, and there was other good performances. The mom and dad on that show, Marion Ross, who's from Minnesota, was the mom, and oh man, I forget who played Howard Cunningham. I can see him, but Tom Bosley, wonderful actor. So Happy Days lasted like 11 years, and went through many character changes because people were leaving the show, but Fonzie stayed on to the very end. Um, Laverne and Shirley, I was never a huge fan of them, but I left the TV on. during Laverne and Shirley because I was waiting for Three's Company. I love that show. John Ritter, Suzanne Summers, and Joyce DeWitt were the original cast members, and to this day, you can still you hear people. Matter of fact, when I'm at work, Andrew, uh, there's this one girl, or she's a grown woman that her name is Chrissy, and the other person that she usually hangs with, her name's not Janet, but I just call them Janet and Chrissy. And when they walk by me, I'll go, "Come and knock on our door. We've been waiting for you." So that opening song for Three's Company is very iconic, and it also kind of introduced people a little bit to homosexuality. And even though the main character on the show, John Ritter, who played Jack Tripper, he wasn't gay, but they came up with this ruse or the facade, I guess, um, so the landlords wouldn't kick him out of the apartment because he lived with Janet and Chrissy, and here you have a couple of 20-year-old hot women that John Ritter was living with in the show, and the landlord would not allow that if he was straight. So they basically created this lie that he was gay, so he could stay in the apartment, and there was no hanky panky going on, but it was just it was sort of the idea of it, I guess, and the girls needed a roommate to help pay the rent, and they liked the fact that John Ritter could cook, and that they had a guy living in the apartment for protection. So that was sort of another landmark show in the 70's just because of the implication of that, and getting people kind of used to the idea of having a gay roommate, or even though he wasn't gay on the show, just the idea that that was a possibility. So and I don't remember what followed Three's Company. Um, yeah, it just totally escapes me now. Maybe one of our listeners will remember and remind us. But so Tuesday night was a great night for TV. Wednesday was more oh, they were more cop shows. My brother Bruce liked this show called Vegas with uh, um, I don't even remember Bob Urich. Bob Urich was the star of that show. Um, and Curtis, Tony Curtis was in the show, and Judy Landers and Phyllis Davis. I mean, it was a good cast, and I think I don't remember if Starsky and Hutch was on that night. Um, Thursday nights, Friday nights. I mean, uh, I can remember in the early 70's, Andrew, when I was a little kid, I was like 10 years old, and on Friday nights, it started with some good, wholesome TV, right? Okay, the Brady Bunch would be on at 7 o'clock, and then the Partridge Family would be on at 7:30. So you had two good shows, and then something called The Odd Couple uh, with Tony Randall and Jack Klugman. And they were two divorced guys living together. So some of the humor there was, a little sketchy. And then it went into something called Room 222, which was about high school students and dealing with issues of the 70's, drug, sex, rock and roll. So that was, it was on a little bit later. It was on at 8:30 Central Time. And then after that, there was a show at 9 o'clock from 9 to 10 called Love American Style. And this show, Andrew, really pushed the pencil, really pushed the envelope because lots of sexual situations. It was comedy stuff, um, but it was, um, some partial nudity and stuff. This was the early 70's. And here I am as a 10-year-old watching this. My parents were in bed by 9 o'clock, so they didn't know what I was watching. And and I've never seen that show. Again, it's called Love American Style. I've never seen that show in syndication or available like in a box set on CD or anything like so many of those shows from the 70's are now. So every night of the week, there was something going on. And uh, even Saturday night in the latter part of the 70s, you had Love Boat and Fantasy Island. Fantasy Island was a great show where they break up three different segments into an hour, and everyone would get their fantasy fulfilled. Ricardo Montalban was the owner operator of the island that created the fantasies, and just a wonderful show. Uh, all the greenery on this island, and Mr. Rourke, played by Ricardo Montalban, would be wearing a white tux, and he'd have this midget standing right next to him, also wearing a white tux, named Tattoo, played by a wonderful actor named Hervé Villechaize, who's no longer with us. So just like every night of the week, and as I tell you all this stuff, as I'm describing every night of the week in TV in the 70s, made me realize that I really didn't have a life. I watched a lot of TV.
All right, so saying that you watch all these different TV shows, because like last week, the last 2 weeks, we talked about music, and even if you weren't a huge fan of it, you still talked about certain music and all. With that being said, was there a favorite TV show that you had, or was there a popular TV show that you couldn't stand?
Well, I have two thoughts on that. Number one, you were talking about music, and back in the 70s, Andrew, and I think we touched on this a little bit last week on our music episode, that there were a lot of shows in the 70s that made more of an effort to have a good theme song. Like Cheers. Okay, Cheers was basically in the 80s, 90s, but everyone knows the theme song to Cheers, where everyone knows your name. In the 70s, just about every show had a song, a theme song you could sing along to, and actually a lot of those songs were on the charts. The theme song for Happy Days, that was on the charts. Um, the Laverne and Shirley song, we're gonna make our dreams come true. That was on the charts. Even the MASH song, even though MASH didn't have any words, just that instrumental was on the charts. Welcome Back, Kotter. That's another one by Sebastian Bach. Or not. I'm sorry, not John Sebastian. Uh, Welcome Back is a song that was on the charts. WKRP in Cincinnati, wonderful show. I loved watching that on Monday nights. I think that was on after MASH. What a lineup, huh? MASH, WKRP, Monday Night Football. What could be better? But the theme song for WKRP, also a charted song. So, Andrew, my point is, they made more of an effort in the 70s to have theme songs that people recognized, that you could sing along to. They were actually on the radio, where you'd be driving to work and all of a sudden, you'd hear the theme song for Happy Days going, oh, yeah, that's right, it's Tuesday. Got to watch Happy Days tonight. So it was a wonderful idea. Whoever came up with it, it was a wonderful marketing idea to have these songs be really good, get radio play, be on the charts. And then when people would hear them on the radio, it's like, well, yeah, that's right. It's Tuesday night. We got to watch that. So that was my first thought. And then you said something about, are there shows that I didn't watch? Is that what you asked?
Yeah. Was there a show in the 70s that you just couldn't stand?
Well, again, All in the Family. I didn't understand that show, and even when I watch it today in syndication, it's kind of like, yeah, I can't believe they even let this show run. Because it's. I think it's really offensive. Some people think it's funny, but I don't. But it's considered one of those iconic shows. Mary Tyler Moore, very, very successful show. That's another one, Andrew, that's on one of those all-time shows of the 70s that shaped America, because Mary Tyler Moore, which was her real name, played Mary Richards, who worked at a TV station in Minneapolis, uh, which I think is why a lot of Midwesterners watched it, because it was a show about a single woman living in Minneapolis, and working at a TV station, and she had a wonderful supporting cast in Valerie Harper, who played Rhoda, who went on to have her own show, Ted Knight, who was a newscaster, Gavin MacLeod, who went on to be the captain of the Love Boat. So it was a wonderful cast. Uh, Ed Asner played Lou Grant, who went on to have his own show. Uh, also starred in a Vern Gagne movie called The Wrestler. He played a wrestling promoter and was did voice work for Disney. He was the voice of the grumpy old man in the movie Up that was out a few years back by Disney. So just wonderful, and he was in the movie Elf too. He played Santa Claus. So lots of people came from Mary Tyler Moore. Did I watch Mary Tyler Moore? Not really. It was about, again, about a single woman kind of defining gender roles that anything men could do, women could do it too. They could live on their own. They could be a single woman and pay their own rent, pay their own bills, and it was very it was a modern statement that, yeah, women could do this. They can live on their own. They can have their own jobs. They can work full time. They don't all have to get married and be a housewife. They can have careers. So and I'm totally in support of that. But I never really watched the show, not because I was against that, but because I didn't think it was that funny. It was a comedy. And some parts of it were funny when I did watch it, but Mary Tyler Moore was huge in an age in the early 70's where women's rights were really important and women were making strides to be noticed and to make a name for themselves in society. So it was a huge show, and I think it lasted 6 or 7 years, maybe 8 years before it went off the air. But it looking back on it, yeah, a very important show that shaped the 70's. Just not one that I watched.
So were all these shows pretty much filmed in front of a live studio audience?
I think a majority of them were taped before a live studio audience. Um, some of them had the canned laughter, but that just wasn't. Uh, it just wasn't as effective. Like you go back and you watch shows from the '60s, like Hogan's Heroes, which had canned laughter, and and you could tell the difference between that and a live studio audience, where a show is taped before a live studio audience. It's more spontaneous. Um, the actors have to kind of work around the crowd reaction a little more. There's obviously more outtakes and bloopers and stuff, because sometimes the crowd will react and throw the actors off kilter a little bit. The Carol Burnett show, which was a variety show in the '70's, was big on that, because uh, Tim Conway was a star on the Carol Burnett show, and that guy was so funny. He was such a genius that if he got people going, including the cast members, they'd all have to just stop and have a moment to collect themselves, because Tim Conway was so doggone funny. And if you ever get a chance to watch some Tim Conway clips from the Carol Burnett show, just great stuff.
I definitely have in the past. And I want to ask you this question real quick about MASH. You said you were a fan of MASH. Why was there, do you know why there was a judgment call to make a comedy with Kane Lansing to in a serious drama?
Uh, do I know why it turned into a drama?
Yeah, because it was like all funny with canned laughter, and all of a sudden it changed like a few seasons in.
Well, the original cast was the wonderful Alan Alda, who's one of my all-time favorite TV actors. Alan Alda, very smart man. Even though Steve Martin's a comedian, I think Alan Alda and Steve Martin are two of my all-time favorite performers. Alan Alda's such a smart actor. He was so good on MASH, and he went from start to finish. Where I think Gary Berghoff, who played Radar, no, he didn't even make it to the finish, did he? So it would be Loretta Swit, who played Hot Lips, and Alan Alda are the only two that went from start to finish. Um, I guess William Christopher, who played Father Mulcahy, did as well. Klinger didn't really come on Jamie Farr until the second season. So yeah, just three people made it from start to finish on MASH. And you're right, Andrew. It was a comedy. It was a very funny show. Um, and then when McLean Stevenson, who played Colonel Henry Blake, decided to leave the show, um, they had this wonderful send off where everyone said goodbye to him, and he was wearing this black pinstripe suit that had white pinstripes, and he got in a helicopter and flew away, and you thought that was the end of the show. Still a comedy, still fun, and then the writers pulled a fastball on everybody or a curveball. And in the final scene, they were showing everybody in the operating room, and Radar came in with a message saying that Henry Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan. It spun in, and there were no survivors. So they killed off Henry Blake on the last episode of that season. I think it was the third season, and it was like people were upset. It's like, how dare you do that to us? This is a comedy, and you kill, even though the guy was leaving the show anyway, he wasn't going to be on the show anymore. They killed him off. They couldn't just have him fly back home to the United States and go back to being a husband and a dad. No, they killed him off, and the writers took a lot of heat for that, and but that was reality. That was what happened in war, where if you didn't get killed in war, sometimes you got killed coming home because your plane was shot down. So MASH, again, another show that defined the 70s because of its reality. And from then, MASH took a turn. They were still a comedy, but they had a lot more uh, uh, dramatic episodes. Um, and I can think of several. And when Larry Linville eventually left the show, who played Frank Burns, they brought in the wonderful David Ogden Stiers, who played Major Winchester, who just added such a huge dimension to the show. They brought him in as sort of this pompous surgeon who's really, really good as a surgeon, but he didn't like anybody. He wasn't interested in having friends or hanging out with BJ and Hawkeye. But eventually they kind of softened him up a little bit where he was one of the gang. He was still pompous and thought he was better than everybody else, but he also would partake in the shenanigans and the tomfoolery and stuff. And he was such a wonderful character. He was a great late addition to MASH. I think he was on for the last 3 years or 4 years. Um, so you're right, Andrew. They went from straight comedy to sometimes comedy to by the time it was over, there were a few laughs, but it was mostly drama.
What did MASH stand for?
Uh, that's a real word from the 50s in the Korean War. It stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, and what that means is if they were in a war zone that got to be too dangerous, they could up and move and relocate to another area that wasn't so close to the front lines. But there were MASH units all over Korea. Uh, and in Vietnam as well. All these wars, you have to have doctors over there to repair the people that are wounded because where are they going to go? If you're out in the middle of a minefield and you get blown up or shot or something, I mean they have to evac them somewhere, and so MASH units were a real thing. So it was a dose of reality, like I said, that started as a comedy, then kind of was comedy slash drama. By the end, it was pretty much drama.
All right. So we talked about shows with live studio audiences, and then there's some more serious shows. But those were all like the theme to it. We did a full hour on Johnny Carson back in the summertime. So was there other talk shows or like Entertainment Tonight has like it was still like it wasn't the news, it was still entertainment purpose that you watched in the 70s?
No, Entertainment Tonight. Um, I think that actually started maybe late 70's, early 80's. So there wasn't any type of entertainment shows. There were lots of talk shows in the afternoon. Um, Basically, that's how you got to know your celebrities. There was Mike Douglas, there was Merv Griffin, there was Dick Cavett. Uh, so there were talk shows in the afternoon. The only late night talk show, of course, was Johnny Carson, and uh, and then there was another guy that came around in the late 70's that was on after Johnny Carson, and that was called the Late Late Show with oh, I can't think of who his name was now. Uh, about the only time I watched it because it came on at midnight. The only time I really watched it was when Kiss was on there in 1979, around, I think it was on Halloween. Halloween landed on a Friday, and I stayed up and watched it. Tom Snyder. Tom Snyder had the Late Late Show. So he was the only other talk show besides Johnny Carson in the 70's that was on at night anyway. And and uh, and he didn't even compete with Johnny Carson. He was on after Johnny Carson on the same network. So to answer your question, Andrew, no, there wasn't really a lot of talk shows or entertainment variety type shows in the 70's, like Entertainment Tonight, and later, in the 80's that kind of exploded a little bit with thanks to cable. MTV would have stuff like that, and VH1 and all that. But in the 70's, definitely not. Johnny Carson was king.
Uh, Man, I've been wanting to talk about this Tom Snyder interview for a while. I feel like this is a good opportunity for that. You said you watched that live.
Um, I think it was live. I'm guessing it was because the episode I watched when Kiss was on there, they came on in all their full costume and makeup, and and Ace Ace Frehley was absolutely hilarious that night. Come to find out later that Ace had a little bit too much to drink before the show. That's why he was so funny because Ace doesn't normally talk during interviews. Well, he does now because he's 70 now and he's pretty open about what's on his mind. But when Kiss first started, Ace didn't like to be interviewed, didn't like to talk. But on the Tom Snyder show in 1979 on Halloween, he had a little too much to drink and he basically stole the show, much to the chagrin of Gene Simmons, because Gene basically thought he was the spokesman of the group and didn't like the fact that Ace Frehley was just freewheeling that night.
So that's something that aired live that you watched, and for at least the Kiss fandom, that was looked at as controversial. Was there anything else that you watched at the time or aired in the 70s? Because last week you talked about streaking was the big thing. So was there ever anything that was very controversial from 70s television that you remember seeing live?
Yeah, there was. Mentioning the streaking in 1974, 1975, during one of the award shows, I don't remember if it was the Emmys or the Oscars or whatever, but somebody streaked across the stage. Um, and it was there must have been like a 7 second delay or something where where the private parts were blocked out or blacked out. But it was live TV, but um, there was like a 7 second delay, which is what radio stations use, and just in case somebody gets a little too mouthy on the radio. So, and that also happened on a few other live events. Well, it happened at baseball games all the time, and there was no delay on that. Cameramen were just ordered, if there's a streaker during a baseball game, don't show it. So, because that was live, there was no delay on a baseball game. So if someone was streaking during uh, a Twins game or a White Sox game or something, the TV cameramen were just told, don't show it. Don't put those guys on the air. So obviously, there's been other shocking things. I uh, there was video footage, of course. Well, that was more '60s, where uh, um, the person who was accused of killing John F. Kennedy, on live TV, they showed this guy being led from the police station to another area, and somebody came out of the crowd and shot the guy dead. That was on live TV. That was 1964. But there were other things. I can't think of what they are right now. There was a journalist named Bill Stewart, who was over in the Middle East somewhere, and he was talking to these soldiers from a different country, and he was basically trying to explain to them that he was a reporter, and reporters usually have access to do their job, and they made him lay on the ground, and all this was being filmed for broadcast later. It wasn't live, but it was going to be shown on the news later. And these guerrillas, these rebel soldiers, shot him in the head. And the person that was filming it, all of a sudden you saw the camera go crazy, because he grabbed the camera and turned the Jeep around and got out of there, because he didn't want to be shot as well. So and that was showed on every news station in the country after that happened. So it wasn't on live TV, but up until then, generally you didn't see real murders on TV. You would see it on TV shows that were fake, obviously. But so yeah, things did happen. Moments in history, like men landing on the moon, Hank Aaron hitting the home run that passed Babe Ruth. So yeah, Andrew, things were televised that happened live that made history. Absolutely.
I don't understand why, if that wasn't aired live and a murder happened, why then it was shown everywhere. Like, why even air that footage?
Well, if I remember right, because it made news, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what country that this news reporter was in, or where they were trying to gain access to. I just don't remember, because it was like 50 years ago. But I get it. It was newsworthy, and I remember watching the news. Uh, and before they showed it, they said, that this reporter was killed, and they were going to show the footage, and they warned people ahead of time that this is going to be, shocking. So if you want to turn away and not watch, so they would give you a heads up what was coming, and that you maybe don't want to watch it. And so yeah, but the reason they showed it, Andrew, is basically to show the barbarism of whatever country that was, and I wish I could remember, but it was newsworthy, so that's why they showed it.
Man, that's so, like, if I saw that as a kid, like, that would, like, pretty much disturb me so much and, like, scar me as a kid. I don't know, some sickening things. I don't want to wrap up this week's episode on that. But obviously, we talked about music, where there was variety shows and there was um, like Ed Sullivan show and like stuff like that. Like, if you made it, you made it. And same with Johnny Carson and everything. Was there, I guess, for wrapping up this week's episode, so was there any TV shows that you would say kind of helped somebody's career, that like strictly from the 70's? Like, obviously Henry Winkler is one of them, but no movies, no radio. It was just strictly a television show.
Yeah, sorry I lost you there, Andrew. What was the question?
So I was just asking, like, if wrapping up this week's episode, we talked about the Ed Sullivan show last week. If you made an all seven show, you were a success music star wise. Same with Johnny Carson if you're a stand up. Was there any show other than Henry Winkler that you remember from the '70s that like they didn't need radio or movies, like they became a star strictly from being a television personality?
Yeah, there was actually quite a few of them. John Travolta was on Welcome Back, Kotter, and he made Saturday Night Fever, the disco movie or the movie that launched disco in the '70s. So that was huge. John Travolta went on to be a major movie star. Other people did try to leave their shows and become movie stars, and some of them did. Um, Others didn't. I mean, we could talk about a lot of different people that left shows and made an attempt to do other things. Charlie's Angels, Farrah Fawcett Majors left the show to do some things. She never really became a major quote star in the movies. She made some made-for-TV movies that were successful, but she never really was that major star. Um, Other people that left hit shows maybe wanted to make a different TV show. Wayne Rogers of MASH, who in the first 3 years played Trapper John, he left MASH to have his own show called House Calls, which I think lasted 1 year. So you had people trying different things. It didn't always work out. Travolta is the one that kind of stands out as somebody who really became a major star. Ron Howard left Happy Days not to be a movie star, but because he wanted to be a director. And Ron Howard made or directed several great movies. Um, and I hope I'm not wrong on this, but I know he directed the movie Splash with Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah, where Tom Hanks's character finds a mermaid and brings her back to his apartment, who is played by Daryl Hannah. I'm pretty sure Ron Howard directed that, and he directed some other things too. So he became a successful director, which certainly made him a few bucks. Um, and I know there's others. Um, Another show that we haven't really talked about. I mentioned their theme song, WKRP in Cincinnati. I just love that show. Um, and, and this was before I was even interested in being in radio. But it just looked like being a radio star was really a fun thing, and it was such a good show. It was well cast with Howard Hessman being Dr. Johnny Fever, and Tim Reed was on it as Venus Flytrap, the night announcer, and. And I remember reading comments from people that actually worked in radio stations saying, yeah, this show isn't too far off from reality. And when I got into radio for 10 years, Andrew, yeah, there was a lot of shenanigans and stuff like that went on in radio where the announcers didn't like the salespeople or the news guy was kind of weird. And yeah, that stuff was real. So WKRP in Cincinnati, you look back at that, and that was a great show. You didn't know it at the time, but it was a great show. So, maybe we should actually do a part two of this because, we could talk more about individual TV stars that went on to do other things, and because I'm sure there's more. I'm my mind is a little bit fried this week because of some personal things going on, and we're actually filming this. I'm recording this in a hospital bathroom right now. So, and you're in your car. So, we both kind of are out of our norm this week, and maybe we can continue this next week and have a part two.
We could definitely do that. Yeah. I mean, because I know you're going to come up with some more TV shows and ideas that you want to talk about. We are going to wrap up this week's episode by, you were talking about shenanigans earlier. Because whenever you mention K, like WKRP, I think of Cat. I of Wings. I think of Cheers. I think about those shows that were kind of about an occupation and like in the workplace. But we're actually going to wrap up this week's episode talking about something that was a huge hit in the 70s. It started in the 70s. Tell me everything you remember about Saturday Night Live.
Well, I wasn't really a fan of Saturday Night Live right away. I can remember being in junior high at Monroe Junior High School in St. Paul and hearing my buddies talk about this skit with a guy named Dan Aykroyd um, dropping fish into a blender, and it was called the Bassomatic. And then there was something about 25 baby mangled ducks, and I don't even know what that one was about. And so I watched the show, and I really did. The first couple of times I watched the show, it was on Saturday night after the news. I didn't really get it, and they used to. You would think they'd go to a commercial, and then it was one of their commercials that looked like a real commercial, and you're just going, "What's going on?" And it took a while to figure out the humor, and then once Steve Martin started being on, and I was already aware who Steve Martin was and how funny he was. So seeing Steve Martin interact with Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Lorraine Newman, Garrett Morris, uh, Jane Curtin, all the original members. And then I kind of understood the show a little better because that was Steve Martin's humor, and it was just expanded with all these other people. So Saturday Night Live was something that it took me a little bit to figure it out, but by the late '70s, yeah, I watched it quite a bit, and we'll always have fond memories of those early years of Saturday Night Live.
Definitely. And we always have fond memories every single week when we talk about a new topic. And we have a handful of things we're going to touch on. We might dive into TV more next week. We still have ABBA. We still have Evil Knievel. We have the Winter Olympics. We have Thanksgiving episode coming up. We have our special guests coming up. We have plenty of things coming up. Bryan, thank you for your time today. I know, as you mentioned, you are in a different location. To deal with some personal stuff. I'm definitely praying for you. And take us home for this week's episode. This is Andrew signing off from Orlando.
Well, we'd like to thank our sponsors, and I is it Andrew? You should have did that real quick.
Oh, yeah, I was going to add that in later. But yeah, we do have kinglinenutrition.com where you could get the best snack in edible cookie dough, protein mixes, pancake mixes. Use the promo code Lockhart. And we have GodTheFatherApparel.com, as always, for your best way to describe and express your Christian and spiritual belief through T-shirts and hats and fanny packs and hoodies. That's GodTheFather.com. GodTheFatherApparel.com with promo code Lockhart15 for 15% off. They will be doing Black Friday services or Black Friday deals coming up here at the end of this month. And you can do a double discount on top of that. Those descriptions are all below in our YouTube videos here, which you can listen every week at That 70's Pod. Subscribe on YouTube, That 70's Pod on YouTube. I totally forgot our sponsor. Thank you so much. Thank you for reminding me, Bryan.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks everyone for listening. And thing I learned most here in the last week is that and everyone knows this, that family comes first. You might have important jobs and important relationships, or you might have a big bank account and stuff. But when it comes right down to it, family first, and you do what you can for family. So love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Have a good week, Andrew.
Have a good week.